Well, the budget will be presented by the Finance Minister in just a few hours from now. It's scheduled to start at 11 o'clock this morning. And if we go by Nirmala Sitharaman's past speeches, it may go on for quite a while. She has often spoken for almost up to 2 hours. So we do expect that, given that this is the last big budget before the general election, it too could be a very long budget speech. But let's get straight to our analysts and guests this morning. As all eyes are on the budget and what it presents for all of us, I'd like to welcome Mr. Ashwajit Singh, the Managing Director of IPE Global Limited, here in the studio with us. Professor Govardhan Das from the BJP is with us. We're also joined by Mr. Jayant Krishna, Chief Executive Officer for the Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology.
Right.
And
we Professor
have
Prasanna Tantri, Associate
yes.
Professor, Finance and Executive Director, Center for Analytical Finance. Thank you so much all for joining us on the program today. And let's get down to it. Expectations ahead of the budget, as Nidhi and I were discussing, it's a difficult balancing act for the Finance Minister, given on one hand, we're talking about India being this bright spark and the global economy is looking towards us, but also the reality of the coming year and the recession.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I would really say that what we really are probably going to be having and what we need really is a booster budget. I mean, everybody is talking about the pandemic getting over, but at the same time, while India has recovered a lot post the pandemic, but given the global recession that's there, and India is not going to be isolated, because unlike earlier years, we are very much part of the global system and the ecosystem now. So whatever we may be very optimistic, but the impact of the global recession is going to take place in India as well to some extent.
So you feel that the economic survey was a little too optimistic?
Probably yes, in the sense that they did not, I think, give adequate sort of importance to the global recession that we are seeing already. Because unlike earlier years, or unlike last year when we had a V-shaped recovery post-pandemic, probably we are in for a slightly long haul this time globally. But having said that, I think, given that, I would like to, first of all, I think, see a lot of fiscal consolidation happening this year. I don't want, while we do have to balance between growth and the social sector, but I think we need to also be very prudent in our planning. We need to get the fiscal deficit down. We need to control inflation because, that's otherwise if that gets out of hand, it's going to be difficult. But I think in terms of the areas, probably the first area one really needs to focus on is job creation. We've been talking about that. We've been talking about that over the years.
And we've been doing stories on that, the sort of situation, the reality on the ground.
We talk about India being having amongst the highest workforces in the world, which is there. But are they properly trained? Are their skills really there? I mean, I know of examples where we've got lakhs of applicants for nurses in our state, and they couldn't fill up 5,500 positions. They only ended up having 2,200 employable nurses. So we have to look at skills and industry-wise skills.
So not just jobs, but the quality of jobs.
The quality of jobs is very important, number one. I think other than that, probably, we need to also look at the MSME sector, because we need to have them move from being job seekers to job creators. They provide a lot of percentage in the GDP, and we really need to try and promote the MSME sector as well. Having said that, the social sector again is extremely important, because we can't isolate the social sector, and we need to maybe the G20 motto is also one of the things is women-led development. So we need to have more money going into rural schemes, into the centrally sponsored schemes as well.
So I think that therein lies, as you said, the challenge, because we are also heading into an election year. And Jayant Krishna, how concerned are you, about how the government will be able to balance out, on one hand, perhaps its populist urges and welfare schemes which are also justified on one hand, but at the same time, looking at the fact that there are economic challenges ahead, despite India being projected to be the fastest growing economy in the world?
Yeah, so that's my biggest apprehension, Nidhi, that, government should not resort to populism and, with it being the last budget before the election process gets kicked off, the fervor takes off. So I think that's the biggest challenge. I mean, my fundamental issue is that, we all know we have become the 5th largest economy by nominal GDP, 3rd largest by purchasing power parity. But we are far from being a nation where the economy is led by innovation, And that would not happen unless we invest in research and development in science and technology. That's very, very important. Every year we talk about increasing the outlay for education, about health, which is at a suboptimal level vis-a-vis the international ratios. But even in science and technology, we spend just about 0.64% of our GDP, which is the lowest among all BRIC countries, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis US. So I think that has to go up. If I mean, the results will not be immediate. It will take 6, 7, 10 years, perhaps, But I think if we want the real economic value add to happen to India, the only route available to us is through investment in R&D, in science and technology, substantive increase, big ticket reforms there. So I think it's very, very important. I have talked about science and technology, education. If you look at, we still spend about just about 3% of our GDP on education, both the federal government and states put together. That every government has been saying it has to go up to 6%. Look at healthcare. The government spends just about 1.3, 1.4%. I mean, the overall, the private sector, the individual, the insurance business, in healthcare put together is just about 3.2%. That also needs to go up very, very substantially. So I would think, the march towards the innovation-led economy and the adequate allocation in healthcare as well as education and skills, these are extremely important if our human development index has to increase, if eventually the per capita income goes up. So I think those long-term, because investors now post-COVID and even during COVID with China's geopolitical posturing are looking at investment opportunities other than, China, and moving some of the investments away from China actually. India is well poised, but the government will have to show a lot more hunger, improve the ease of doing business. Some of the areas which are still pain points like land and labor, their reforms are required. So I think reform centricity, if the government factors in, we would be sending a very, very good signal to the investor community all over the world, which is looking at opportunities beyond China for relocating their manufacturing, investments. See, manufacturing, if you look at it as a percentage of GDP, has reduced in our country. It used to be about 16% in 2015. It has become 14%. So we have to look at this sector more seriously. PLI scheme has worked, by the way, but it has worked in creating, some iconic investments. I won't deny that. But those investments are largely capital intensive, largely very, very automated, very, very technology intensive.
Right.
They have not created the kind of jobs people expected the PLI investments to create. So I think these are, to my mind, very, very important priorities.
All right. Interesting that you say India is poised to take advantage of the situation vis-a-vis China, but you feel we need to show more hunger, and that's an interesting way to, to refer to it. Professor Tantri, your view on that, and also ahead of the budget, do you think the salaried class need to temper expectations right now?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on your show. So my expectation is, government should stick to its principle of countercyclicality. Countercyclicality also means when things are normal, you sort of stay away from markets. If you see the numbers, out of 80 lakh crores of savings that we have, governments, both central and state, end up borrowing 24 lakh crore out of this 80 lakh crore. So leaving very little for private sector to invest. So while there are signs of private capex picking up, this requires the pressure from government to go down. So I'm looking for fiscal deficits to be lower than, even projections. This idea of government crowding in private investment works during a crisis time and not during normal times. We can't claim that situation is normal and also persist with those emergency measures. That's the first thing. Second, specifically regarding salaried class. See, salaried class or any one of us should bother about the size of the government spending. That 40 lakh crore that government is going to spend is our tax. It is not just what they take from our pockets. Either they will take directly from our pockets or through inflation or from next generation through borrowing. So I don't think just the rate that matters. It's the overall government spending. And this government came with the promise of minimum governance, minimum government and maximum governance. So I hope to see that happening. So far, the size of government has not decreased. And finally, one great thing that has happened is transparency. This finance minister has been very, very transparent and very cautious with budgeting. I hope that continues.
All right. Let me go to Mahima Singh. She's a spokesperson of the Congress party as well. And I know the Congress will criticize the budget, much like the way CEOs will probably give it 10 out of 10 in a few hours from now. But Mahima Singh, putting that aside, politics aside for just a moment, what are your realistic expectations in terms of a wish list? What would the Congress like to see? Let me begin that way. You'll have to unmute your mic, Mahima Singh. The
Good morning.
Zoom. Yeah.
Morning, everybody.
Morning. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you see that this government, the over-optimistic government, is used to living in denial. You asked me about my wish list. Well, to start with, I think, decreased inflation, decreased fiscal deficit, increased jobs for the youth of this country, I think are the first priorities of the Congress. We would like to see tangible steps by the government that reduce the inflation and that actually work towards job creation, that work towards revenue creation. However, what we are seeing right now is that the foreign investors are pulling out of this country, especially after the last few days that we have seen. And we have raised it in the all-party meeting, about the Hindenburg report and the BBC documentary. And let me just say, I'd like to present a few statistics because that's very relevant, right, when we are looking at today's budget, which is, as you've mentioned, the last before the election year. Let me just say that, the fiscal deficit has widened to a 9.3% of GDP in 2021, which is the highest gap since the country was liberalized, the economy was liberalized in 1991. Then you see the 8 core infrastructure sectors, I must mention: coal, crude oil, natural gas, petroleum, refined products, fertilizers, steel, cement and electricity, which actually have a 40.27% weightage of index of, the IIP index of industrial production. We have seen a 26-month low in growth, in the growth there, which was at 4.2% in October 2022. So I think the government will have to take tangible steps. The taxes have been increased on all consumables for a common citizen today. The middle class, I would say, must be focused upon, because we do talk about largesse on the poor class. We do talk about benefiting the industrialists, and that we have seen. Hindenburg has quite shown us how do we focus there. But the middle class, I think, should be focused upon in this budget.
You have quite an exhaustive wish list. I mean, and I think a lot of people won't disagree with in terms of a wish list. And how much of that actually follows through in the budget is the question. Professor Govardhan Das of the BJP is here with us.
Yeah.
And we're talking politics because it will be very much a political budget. We're going into an election year. Would you say that the Congress is being unreasonable in its list of what it would like to see?
Yeah, good morning and thanks for having me here today. Although we came here to talk about the budget, and I don't know how you are, joining it with politics. But before I enter all the budget wish list, let me respond to Madam Congress spokesperson. What she was talking about, that what job creation and what failed, etc. She knows that in 2014, what was the daily wage? It was 272 rupees. Today, what is the daily wage? Do we know all this? 616 rupees. Having said that the country, the way it's developing is phenomenal. In fact, during the COVID pandemic period, job is the highest in government sector, is a highest number of job is been created and employment is given. Today, that if you look at the highway, this is a highway is 37 kilometers per day is government is making making. So 80 crore people been given the free grains for last 3 years. 250 crores doses of free vaccine given. It's not only in India, it is given 150 countries. So basically, all the time, the last several years, whatever the budget is plan is well thought of, and India is progressive. If you look at the surrounding countries, in fact, throughout the world is entered in the recession. In the commodity prices in US gone up like anything, but in India still we are doing far better off, and we are expecting the people-friendly budget, and I am expecting the wish list is in the agriculture sector, science and technology, and job creations. These are the things in our wish list, and it is going to happen.
Okay, all right. And you're right. I mean, overall, India is, I mean, that's why it is poised to be the fastest growing economy despite all the other headwinds. But I have a slightly different question, and maybe it's because it's early in the morning and no one gave me a cup of coffee yet. But Ashwajit Singh, let me ask you this. Why do we make such a big deal about the budget? And I'm only asking this because I noticed in the last few years, this government at least doesn't make all its big ticket economic announcements in one budget speech. It's actually a continuous process. In a sense, there is a budget speech and then new things are announced in the weeks following. There might be changes in the months following. But we are all so focused on this one speech.
Though having said that, the BJP has a whole program already about
No, I know, but I'm just saying that actually the government makes announcements throughout the year.
I
to promote all the pro
couldn't agree
people
more with you,
announcements.
Nidhi. I think over the years we've really been, looking forward to the budget more as a ritual and an announcement of some of the intent of the government. See, it's a good sort of mechanism for the government to announce their intent and give the direction to the country. But yes, a lot of major things happen during the year. And I would again say that to me, the budget or the allocation is not as important as the actual utilization of the allocation.
Correct.
Very often we see announcements in the budget and then there's either a rollback or an enhancement in the revised budget or during the year. I mean, take the example of Narega. Narega we've seen go up and down post-budget. It's never really ended up being the budget figure. I mean, we were to look at providing jobs to all those registered in Narega and give them 100 days of jobs. We're really looking at 1.8 lakh crores, whereas the allocation is really anything like 1/4 of that. So the budget is a intent, and I would really again say, but it's important for us to have the budget because we really then know which way the policies are going to roll. The people start planning accordingly. So yes,
and
I would.
And for the middle class, of course, the taxes. That's what they all get. The slabs and the taxes.
We've not really seen too much of tampering with taxes in the past, and I don't expect that to happen too much. But yes, the intent on the impetus on the social sector, whether there is going to be more focus on health. So that intent goes in skill development, and of course I think a lot of earlier speakers spoke about manufacturing. I think it's about time we really try to pump up the manufacturing sector in India, because all said and done, we've not been able to take the benefit of China as we should have. A lot of that's gone to other countries.
We'll talk about that. We have to take a break. We'll talk about that after the break and how India can do that and sort of move that manufacturing sector away from China towards us. Why is it that companies are still looking more at Vietnam and other countries? Yeah, exactly. So let's take a quick break. We'll be back right after that to talk to our panelists.
Welcome back. It is budget day and we're discussing expectations ahead of the big announcement, the speech, which Nidhi is hoping is not 2 hours long this year at least. But we're also joined in studio by Ajay Veer Jakhar, Chairman, Bharat Krishak Samaj. And before the break, we were talking about manufacturing, etc., their expectations. But I'd like to ask you, what would you like to hear in this budget for the agricultural sector, for farmers?
I think there are lots and lots of expectations farmers have. Farmers have definitely benefited from international commodity prices that have been high because of the Ukraine war and other reasons. Yeah. But at the same time, input costs have increased, especially for inputs and costs. But farmers would obviously want creation of jobs, actually. So what I expect for farmers is that there is something that creates employment for children of farmers who are looking to, go out of their farming, they're compelled to farm, and that's the key point. How do you create employment? How do you create jobs? And that's the key, I think. So, what farmers would want.
So for the next generation. So, but for the farming sector as such, expectations there, and that's interesting. That I mean, like everybody, job creation. We were talking about it earlier. That is one of the key needs right now in the country.
So other than farming, if you look at fertilizer prices, they're subsidized to a great extent. If you look at what's happening in Pakistan and the fertilizer price, urea price in India, it's like a few times of difference. So not that the government has not done much, but obviously you would want more support going into procurement, and procurement being not just announcements, but actually minimum support price, declaration of minimum support price, transferring into actual procurements on the ground, which obviously also requires contribution by the state governments. And so it's a better issue of coordination between the state and the center. The center itself cannot do much on agriculture because agriculture is a state subject. So there's a tendency to ask the central government to do everything, but contributions need to come in from the states also.
States as well.
Yes.
But coming to this issue of employment, jobs, etc. Jayant Krishna, the economic survey again was a little more optimistic on the employment front, pointing out that employment levels have risen in the current financial year. They've talked about a better labour force participation rate as well. And urban unemployment in particular is what they're focusing on. But I think it's what they're not focusing on where the real story may lie in terms of rural unemployment and that sector. And is that what should worry us more?
Yeah, absolutely, Nidhi. I mean, if you look at the agriculture and allied sector, it accounts for almost 45% of the labor force, right? I mean, it is occupied there. And what does it contribute to the national GDP? Just about 15%. So a sector whose contribution to the GDP is 50% and almost 45% of the labor force is dependent on that. So obviously people have to move out of agriculture. They're looking for avenues outside of agriculture, which is not happening with the same velocity which is required. And see, today it's not that jobs are not getting created. Jobs are getting created, but most of those jobs are in informal and unorganized sector. And many of those jobs do not become as aspirational, So I think that's the biggest challenge. As I said earlier, that PLI scheme seems to have worked in getting some iconic manufacturing investments. But what it has not succeeded is in creating large-scale jobs because many of those investments are technology-intensive. See, some of the sectors in India, somehow we don't talk about them, but they are still largely very, very, hugely employment-centric. For example, leather. For example, apparel manufacturing. These are sectors which still remain very, very, hugely employment generating sectors. I think there has to be a scheme for these kind of sectors. That's very, very important. And our FDI, which did peak during during the COVID period, it did come down a bit. But I believe what it has come down to is more is a stable level. I think it's the overseas investor community. They are looking for regulatory certainty in the country. They do not want a retrospective tax kind of a reputation and things like that. So I think once that happens, more investments would come and job creation would happen. But the government has to keep in mind that, all manufacturing investments today do not create the kind of jobs, which people would like to see it happen in the country.
All right, we're also joined by Lakshmi Iyer, CEO Investment Advisory, Kotak Investment Advisors Limited. Thank you so much for joining us. We were discussing expectations ahead of the budget. It seems that expectations are tempered right now. People looking for a good budget, not expecting too much big bang announcements. But Lakshmi Iyer, your expectations?
Yeah, hi, good morning. So firstly, I think this budget is going to be a multi-dimensional expectation budget, specifically the reason being as we move out of the pandemic phase and also as we try to, curb inflation. So how are you going to achieve fiscal prudence? I think that is going to be key as a watch list, at least from a market standpoint. How do you get in that inclusive growth by being mindful of the fact that inflation cannot be soaring high? And of course, how do you continue your boost to domestic production at a time when there is a global slowdown and global exports obviously have been sagging? So I think these are some of the broader expectation among the minor. Of course, the key is also going to be how do you channelize your expenditure on the capital side. The expectation is to see a 11 to 12% growth on the capital expenditure side. And that we are already seeing. We saw some glimpses on the economic survey front, how there has been incipient recovery as far as private capital formation is concerned. So I think these are some of the check the boxes that we would be looking forward for the budget this morning.
Professor Tantri, just to get you, back on this point actually that Lakshmi Iyer also raised. the economic headwinds that are there globally. And, Ashwajit Singh was pointing out the same thing. India cannot escape that. Yes, we may still be the fastest growing economy, but the fact is our exports are getting hit, the rupee is depreciating, there is inflation, and all of this, will have an impact on demand at home and therefore everything else that happens to us here. So how do you look at the challenges that India faces in the midst of this global slowdown?
The global headwinds, situation has improved over the last couple of quarters. If you see IMF projection yesterday, they sort of revised up the global growth. So I see some improvement there. Having said that, yes, the Europe remains challenging, but this is the right time to focus on domestic matters. There are issues which are independent of these global slowdown. For example, contract enforcement is a problem in India. One of the reasons why private sector capex is not picking up is not lack of demand. There are, ease of doing business still remains a challenge, and one big problem is contract enforcement. And as you know, when the ease of doing business rankings were getting published, although we improved tremendously on almost all parameters, this is one area where we were like 150th, 160th, and so on. So government has to seriously think about what can be done to, improve contract enforcement. Domestic capacity utilization, private sector capacity utilization is low. The solution so far from the government has been to sort of increase government spending and sort of crowd in private expenditure. That works in crisis times and may not work during normal times. Normal times, you need hard reforms, reforms which increase efficiency. And lastly, we have a great opportunity given the domestic demand. The spending domestically is going up. I think we should try to tap into domestic markets. And my sense is global economy is not going to be as bad as it's made out to be. So I think we should be fine there as well.
Right, we have to take another break. That's important because ads are important. So give us 2 minutes. We'll be back right after that to look at what other sectors have, what their wish list is from the Finance Minister this morning. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Welcome back. We're talking about the budget which will be presented at 11 o'clock by Finance Minister. It's her fifth budget that she will be presenting. Lots of expectations ahead of it, and we have a panel, we have our guests here in studio as well to talk about our expectations. There you can see live visuals ahead of the Finance Minister leaving for Parliament. But let's, before the break we were talking about the manufacturing sector, we're talking about exports as well, but let's now focus on some of the other sectors where there are great expectations. And I think we've been talking about coming out of the COVID years. And after the COVID years, of course, we've realized the importance of health and health infrastructure. So, Ashwajit Singh, what do you think, should the government's focus be? And a big boost to the health infrastructure is something that we've all come to appreciate and realize we need.
Absolutely. I would say that, while COVID is over for the time being, but I think we need to continue focusing on health as well, because we've seen that this one sector can really impact livelihoods, lives, economy, everything. So I think we need to do that. Let me start. I would say, first of all, I think Ayushman Bharat is a reasonable success. What I would, of course, like to see in Ayushman Bharat is more private sector involvement, because we are still largely dependent within the Ayushman Bharat on the government hospitals and district hospitals and primary centers. But to get the private sector, again, I would want to see better pricing, more important, timely payment for them. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of private sector shirks away from the Ayushman Bharat or other CGHS schemes because of the payment cycle itself. Would like to see a lot of more focus on the primary healthcare facilities, because right now the top 20 cities in India probably have nearly about 70% of the healthcare, because we need to eventually move in for a universal coverage, more insurance, because the out-of-pocket expenses in India continue to be very high. Over the last few years, we've seen some investment in health, but more focus on medical education, which is really required. And I would also want to see, the Finance Minister last year spoke about blended finance in her speech. That wasn't really detailed in the speech, but she spoke about blended finance as a concept. Now, the entire year, we've not really seen too much of blended finance happening. It's been happening in bits and pieces, especially in health it's been happening. So I would like to see a lot of more blended finance and innovative financing to get in the private sector players into health, because health is a long-term gestation period is most projects.
No, and definitely.
And a lot of startups also will come in only if you've got blended finance.
Better health facilities in the rural parts rather than, focusing so much on cities, which is what we've seen. Mahima Singh, if you'd like to add something here.
In fact, earlier when the BJP leader was speaking, Gargi, I wanted to, speak at that moment because he talked about the job creation. He, as I said, over-optimistic Bhajpa was talking about how the jobs are created. Let me remind that our Congress president has been time and again alarming the government about a vacancy of 10 lakh jobs at the center itself, which must be filled. He was talking about the wages. Let me just say that Manrega budget allocation how it has screwed in the last 2 years. In 2020, it was at 1.10 lakh crores. Whereas we saw in 2022-23, it was reduced to 89,400 crores. Let's see this year, what are they going to do? And then free vaccines he was talking about, and just now I heard the panelists talk about the health infrastructure. Well, this government is surely guilty of self-proclamation, Gargi, if not anything else. Because you see, free vaccines, you would remember how the government had failed in its promise of or rather in its duty, towards the public. The state has to provide health, education, jobs. This is the basic minimum duty of the state. Yet, it wasn't provided, and the Supreme Court had to intervene. And after the Supreme Court order, free vaccines were provided. So, and we did see how a major part of the budget allocated for health has actually, been underutilized also.
All right, well, let me get Professor Das in here. Your response to that and about the health sector, and Mahima Singh there's talking about underutilization of funds for health.
See, once again, health sector in the government of India is doing of its best. Right now, if you look at, we have already 643 medical colleges. So we are really producing lots of doctors. I mean, even probably the 22 aims already, we have probably already 15 or 16 aims already up in there. And if you look at, in that respect, in India is producing probably the highest number of medicines and vaccines. And once again, I would like to re-emphasize 150 countries we supplied vaccines. And around 200 countries
yes,
we supplied.
Pharmaceutical industry is something that we've all,
and healthcare system, we are
years,
dramatically improving. And right now we have had 643 medical colleges, 22 aims. So basically, these are the things government is doing. Government is very sensitive, and healthcare system. Look at this is Ayushman Bharat Yojana, CGHS, all kinds of insurance plans. The government is doing really great.
All right, Jayant Krishna, coming back to the manufacturing and job creation, you were talking about how India is poised to, take advantage of in this coming year of this, what's happening in China. However, you're saying we're not showing enough hunger. If you could, elaborate on that, and what would you like to see the government do on that front?
I think there are two things. One is hunger, be paranoid about not losing any investor who wants to come to India, traveling that extra mile, rolling out the red carpet. I think that's very important from a gesturing point of view, from posturing point of view. But over and above, I think, as I said, that regulatory certainty is what international investors look at. That's extremely important. And the other thing which I wanted to raise was that, India has to look at its trade deficit a little more seriously. If memory doesn't fail me, the current magnitude of the trade deficit that we have is of the order of about $300 billion, which is a substantive part of our GDP, I think we have to become a country, a nation which believes that trade also adds substantially to GDP. Our trade to GDP ratio has, of course, improved in the last couple of years. It's almost 44% now, but it used to be even higher. And there are countries, there are economies like Singapore, where this ratio is even more than 100%, of GDP, trade to GDP ratio. I think we have to become a believer in that. And some of the trade deals, like with UK, we are talking about the free trade agreement. Some discussions had started with the US and even with the European Union. I think India has to fast track that. That's very, very important. While Atmanirbhar Bharat as a concept, I welcome. It's a good thought process. But cutting Atmanirbhar Bharat and putting a lot of embargo on imports is also not the right thing, because there's a process towards which kicks off before domestic manufacture of those products happens. So I think it's very, very important that not to have protectionism, not to put artificial barriers, and be more open towards trade, because trade can help. Trade also creates, by the way, I mean, as I said, it adds to the GDP, it creates jobs. I think we as a country have to believe in that thought also, without putting aside of the manufacturing ambitions and goals.
All right, well, we'll slip into a short break right now. On the other side, we're going to take a look at what other countries feel about India and how they're looking at the budget and India's growth story going forward. We'll slip into a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're counting down to the budget. The Finance Minister is in her office, and that budget announcement coming at 11. Lots of expectations ahead. What kind of a budget it is. Salaried class have their own expectations. The Aam Aadmi has its expectations. The industry has its expectations. Let's go across to Sakshi now for more. And Sakshi, take us through some of what is being speculated and what we really need to see in this budget.
That's right, Gargi. The countdown has begun, and as India gets ready for Union Budget 2023-24, and the spotlight is on announcements related to income tax, disinvestment targets, as well as what will happen for the emerging electric vehicle sector, digitalization, also on whether concerns of the middle class, rural India, and the agricultural sector will be addressed. Economists, market experts, and tax experts believe individuals are facing huge challenges on account of inflation, and more purchasing power is the absolute need of the hour. They also think job creation will have to be top priority along with sector-specific measures. So let's hear some of these voices that shared their thoughts with us.
My expectation is that the Finance Minister will allocate higher proportion for infrastructure projects such as roads, highways and railways, as well as defence, as these will boost the economy and provide employment. Being the penultimate budget before the general elections next year, the focus will be on rural as well as urban middle class. We could see higher spending on rural-centric schemes, whereas there could be tax breaks for the middle class, especially on the income slab, as well as reductions, so more savings in their hands. Sector-specific, we could see SOPs for real estate sector. Some of the consumer durables currently taxed at 28% could get some relief. Further relaxation of labour laws would directly benefit the staffing companies, percolating down to the IT sector.
Job creation will have to be an absolute top priority for this budget. And here I would hope for the budget to turn its attention to MSMEs. Larger corporates have already been taken care of through the production-linked incentive scheme. But MSMEs, which will be drivers of job growth in the economy, need urgent attention. And here I would hope that the budget tries to improve access to finance for MSMEs, also reduce the cost of finance for MSMEs, given that we're operating in an environment of tighter monetary policy. I would also hope for a greater focus on industrial development cluster schemes, which help in enhancing the competitiveness of MSMEs. Additionally, I would hope for the budget to rationalize import duty structures, in particular correct the inverted duty structure, and also reduce import duties on key inputs, which are raw materials in the MSME sector. And finally, one would hope for a continued focus on infrastructure spending, but that focus doesn't necessarily have to be on very capital-intensive projects which have long gestation period, but on smaller projects that focus on local economies and can generate a multiplier effect for the local economy more quickly in the short run.
All right, so that is some of the voices ahead of the budget on expectations. Inflation remains a very big worry, and as we were talking about manufacturing, employment, etc. But let's also talk about some of the other things. We're going into a year where India is leading at the G20, and there's been a lot of talk about that. So there's also world over been a lot of focus on climate change and all these concerns going forward, and that is something too that countries need to address. Maybe not in this budget that we do, but we need to know more about what we're planning to do on that front. So, Mr. Jakar, if you could, talk about that and expectations and where we need to focus on.
I really think that this country, like most other countries, are following a model which has come from the West, which equates quality of life with consumption. Like we expect that if the GDP goes up, quality of life will automatically improve for the masses. It does not have, it has a correlation, but it does not work out in economies like India. So we need to focus on human resources. We need to prioritize human resources over infrastructure. That's what farmers would want. You have 50% vacancies in agriculture universities, in ICAR, which is the Agriculture Research Institute, in extension workers, which get advice to farmers. You look at other services. You look at the number of judges available. You look at the number of officers in various departments. There's a 50% vacancy. So we really need to focus on human resources, and that's the key for India's growth story. The other part is there's a lack of capacity we find within various ministries which deal with the farming community. And I'm not talking about industry and other associations because we've not had much dealings with them. But there is a lack of capacity to deliver on the ground. And that lack of capacity then leads to a problem that government departments, ministries, and which includes states also, they are going to advise to business organizations which are in the business of giving advice. They are not stakeholders. They don't get affected by the advice. They give you advice. These are these multinational consultancy firms. They give you advice. After 10 years, it doesn't work. 5 years, it doesn't work. They have moved on and somebody else has come in. So if you look at farmer-producer organizations, it's a one big bang scheme of 10,000 farmer-producer organizations are going to come up. And you have this organization, Grant Thornton, which designed the whole thing. They have no inkling of what they've designed. And I think it's an absolute failure. So the lack of capacity, lack of focus on human resources, lack of capacity and development of human resources which already exist.
And these are the issues you feel that we need to focus on more and not just talk in terms of numbers and GDP. Well, hold that thought. We'll slip into a short break. We're counting down to the budget. We have our panel of experts to take us through the various concerns and expectations. We'll slip into a short break and return with more.